Welcome to Raven Talk, the official podcast of the Raven Tribe. The Raven Tribe is a home for warriors on the path, and is dedicated to training warriors for the battlefield of life. Visit us on the web at theraventribe.com, where you can learn more information on membership, warrior training, as well as links to our official YouTube channel, Facebook group, apparel store, and our official bookstore, Marshall Books. Welcome back, Tribe. We're here today with special guest Dayn Derose from South Mountain Martial Arts in New Jersey. Today we're going to be discussing the martial sport and the martial art of Sambo. Dayn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be with us. Dayn, before we get started, for those listeners at home who may not be familiar with Sambo and with yourself, can you give us a little introduction of who you are and how you became involved with the sport of Sambo?
My name is Dayn Derose. I began judo in 1965 as just turning 11-year-old. Since then, got lucky. My instructor's brother-in-law was a karate teacher, learned karate, became now Rokudan, 6th-degree black belt in karate, was involved in international karate competition for some years in the 90s. Jiu-jitsu from 1976, same dojo, a guy came by who knew jiu-jitsu. Been studying since then. And now I'm with USJJO, which is a wonderful group that does a Europeanized form of jiu-jitsu, including striking techniques in the competition. Right. But Sambo, again, we had a good school. Mamoru Shimamoto ran it. In 1979, I met a fellow named Alex Hafitz, and it introduced me to the world of Sambo. Now I'm, believe it or not, according to the American Amateur Sambo Federation, an honored master of sport, which is quite a high distinction. I look at it from, it's a high distinction, like, well, I should be an international, but honored, well, glad for it, right? And I've been on the USA Sambo coaching staff, for, I suppose, as long as there's been a USA Sambo, and before that, the American Amateur Sambo Federation, and before that, the USSA. Been with it a while, and I'm going to the Pan American Championships tomorrow in Asuncion, Paraguay, as a referee, which is a relatively new role for me. I don't know. Is there something else I can clarify about that?
No, I think that gives us a good understanding of who you are and where you're coming from as far as Sambo. Now, Dayn, for just purpose of clarification, what exactly is Sambo? Because Sambo is, from my understanding, is not one particular historic art, but it's a blended martial art, correct?
Absolutely. At first, I thought that was, frankly, Soviet, publicity, shall we say. And then it turned out, as I got into it, there were studies and even books written on how Sambo was, combined, stratified, the whole thing. It is a composite martial art. I'd say the initial basis was pre-war judo, which was still very much a martial art. Then added and subtracted things, Savat, there's a pie chart, and it goes with all these world activities where they actually did go there and study them. So it's as much a good composite of striking, weapons, the whole thing, modern weapons, as they could come up with. In terms of active sparring, there are basically two forms. There's Sambo Borba, meaning like wrestling Sambo, which is like a judo competition. You could compare, except that there are more kinds of throws that score. You can throw someone on their chest. You can lock the leg. You can't choke in sport Sambo. Very, very interesting difference. Locking and choking. Choking you can't do. That's the only thing I think you can't do. Whereas in combat Sambo, there was no competition that way, just training for many years. Now, combat Sambo is a form of That's described as a form of MMA.
Now, sir, you mentioned weapons, and that is, something that jumps out at somebody when they're discussing a sport. But what is the role of the weapons? Was Sambo developed originally as an art for self-protection, for the military, or was it originally developed as a competitive sport?
Well, actually, Sambo was developed for the military and the police first, and it was, the name is a composite. They called it several things, but ended up with an acronym, and the acronym is for Samozashta bez oruzhia, and forgive my pronunciation of Russian. It stands for self-defense without weapons, which they abbreviated to Sambo. So it is very, very grounded in self-defense, unarmed combat. They did the Kata-like decision, and essentially taking a long look at judo that, whatever you did in terms of practice for unarmed combat, you needed an active element. You needed not just drilling and learning of techniques, but doing techniques to somebody else who didn't want them done to them and wanted to do them to you. So they had a round-ori idea, which was, okay, now with limited use of the techniques, no palm heels to the chin, nothing like that, what do you do? And they first came up with a kind of more judo-like idea of how to do it, and then developed over time, and very scientifically, if I may say, a way of doing punching, kicking, knees, elbows, all the rest of that, and throws and submissions in competition. Weapons, it is self-defense without weapons, but it's kind of like the concept toward jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu never was completely weaponless. It was minimally armed combat. What do you do when you don't have your main weapon or can't use it, katana, rifle, whatever it is? Your chances of surviving on a battlefield are quite limited without your main weapon, but you got to do something, right? And so, although it's Samozashta bez oruzhia without weapons, they do train you in, if you go to the right places and don't just practice sport, some do, they train you with a knife, baton, and specializing in the use of the entrenching tool, which I have never learned. I have to say, I have never learned that. But knife is a big deal, and short stick baton is a big deal. They do go over self-defense in that way. Yes, and self-defense against pistols, etc. Again, more limited, and with the caveat that you're probably going to get hurt, right? Which I think should be a caveat for every martial activity. You're not going to get out of this cleanly most of the time, but this is what you can do to survive.
Now, sir, it's my understanding that Sambo is the national sport of Russia. It's immensely popular outside of the United States. But within the United States, in at least my career, I've not seen Sambo prior to maybe 20, 25 years ago, really hitting the map in the martial arts community here in the United States. Is that an accurate statement?
I'd say, yeah. I'd say that's pretty accurate. What happened here is that the people the people in person of, got to give him credit. The first person bringing here was Josh Henson. He was a good man. He wanted to popularize it. But what happened is Sambo kind of fell into the wrestling community. And frankly, I don't know that they knew what to do with it at first. Sambo around the world is far more associated with judo. That doesn't make it better. It's just that I think that judo kind of gets Sambo as an activity, and that, the Soviets, now the Russians and the former Soviet countries, et cetera, they always looked at judo and Sambo as two sides of the same coin. Right. So it's like another event for judo. Right. And as a result, they kind of had a place for it in their countries. Whereas with America, it's neither beast nor fowl. It's not judo. And judo here is the USA Judo and the IJF. And there has been an attempt at cooperation. Right. Didn't kind of work out. And then, for many years, wrestling kind of fooled with it. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to say fool as in play around. But they they tried to adapt to it and everything like that. No, Sambo is better off by itself. I think I see more growth of Sambo now in the nationals and in the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Arnold Classic tournaments than I've seen in the last 25 years. So it's on a good path now. But before that, it was actually trying to find its role, what community it would lay in and what it would draw from. And that, I think, is what the problem was.
Now, when Sambo first came, on my radar, I noticed it, being actually just in advertisements, back of Black Belt magazine, different martial arts magazines. And it was around the time that the UFC was in its inception. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was really hitting the map. And people were kind of marketing Sambo as the answer to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What kind of role has Sambo played in the mixed martial arts community? And especially now, it's very popular. Grappling tournaments, amateur mixed martial arts is becoming more and more popular. I can't walk down a street and not see an MMA, gym somewhere in the neighborhood. Where does Sambo fall into, that history of the martial arts in the United States?
Well, as mixed martial arts developed from the introduction of the UFC in the mid 1990s, Sambo and Sambo people were always present, but in small numbers. And then you have to understand it was, essentially a survival of a closed society, right? Where people didn't want to let you know what they were doing. They wanted to know why you wanted to know what they were doing. There was a little bit of looking over your shoulder and things. So, it wasn't like, oh, come here. And, the marketing that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu did very, very successfully, which quickly, by the way, outstripped Judo too, in the United States. The Russian fighters slowly came in. Some of them were Sambists, some of them weren't, and were using Sambo as a word to kind of scare people. By the way, Sambo player is a Sambist properly in Russian. It's a Samboist. I don't care what you say, but they will refer to it that way. So as these folks kind of came forward, by the way, Fedor Emelianenko, who, is a great Sambist and a multiple-time world champion, as you know, was originally on the RFSSR, the Russian Federation, national judo team. He knew Sambo too, right? But he was more a judo player at first, all right? So what I'm saying is it's kind of a mixed bag of people coming in from some former Soviet country who knew relative amounts of Sambo, but, Oleg Taktarov, Fedor Emelianenko, of course, those people kind of brought it out to the fore. And then, of course, Sambo, they're good with leg locks. Well, that's not all we do. It's a variant usage compared to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Judo of the same stuff. Really, between the three disciplines, there's a lot of the same things, right? But then it was, well, who knows this? Where do you learn it? And there were not a lot of people who could teach it in an organized way. A lot of people, frankly, over the last 30 years, 20 years, who knew some of it and knew some way to present it, but really didn't know it as an organized study. That's changing now. There are people around the country who do. But before this, no. And so that's why you go, well, where do you learn this? And someone would say that they taught it, and they show you a few moves. Right? Maybe won a medal at a tournament, which is a good thing, right? But it doesn't, when being a competitor is not the same thing as being a coach and an instructor. So it's been suffering from that comedy, hopefully, of manners for about 20 years. Getting down to more serious stuff now, though, I have to say. We're sending teams that are doing pretty well all over the world. We had medalists at the Karl Amphiev Cup, right, this past year, which is a World Cup, and it's a high-level event, So, yep, it had a very weird introduction because, people were opening Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu clubs. There are judo clubs. Sambo clubs, very few. Very few. Very few people really know how to teach it to a good level.
Now, is the rise of mixed martial arts and especially sport grappling, submission grappling, is that something that is kind of mutually beneficial to, all grapplers across the board? Is it just bringing interest up in that type of sport? Or is this something that's, a direct competitor to Sambo competition? Has it helped or hurt in any way?
No, sorry. Frankly, the rise in grappling has been good for Sambo because people are constantly looking for new things and effective ways to do things. So really, the idea is people will seek out Sambo more reliably than they used to, simply to round out their grappling skills. The only caveat, the only caution there is that, hey, look, you should, when you go to study something, even such thing as MMA, which combines techniques, it's good not to dabble too little. Get a technique here, get a technique there, not train thoroughly at any one thing. So, as a long-time, practitioner and coach of a number of things, I didn't really dabble, I fought for my black belt in judo, competed and then taught karate for some years, twice for some decades actually, right? Jiu-jitsu, not the Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but, my experience with jiu-jitsu of different sorts of same thing, right? So it's not something where you learn a technique here and learn a technique there and then move on. You really should practice whatever the subject is a little more thoroughly than I see some people do. Other than that, no, it's great. Grappling has been good for Sambo. UFC has been good for Sambo. The word's actually out there, and I don't think it's so much a mystery as it's been.
Now, talking about training in Sambo, and you mentioned this, that in the past there haven't been that many clubs and that many, individuals that were able to present it correctly. What are the options for people now if they're interested in training in Sambo? Where can they go? How do they know if, who they're training with is properly trained themselves?
Well, yeah, interesting question. Sorry. I'd say right now the most reliably you can go to what used to be first USA Sambo. If you contact USA Sambo, they'll be able to direct you to people that they have in the different states. That if they're known by USA Sambo, they're pretty solid. Then I'd say after that, Steve Kopfer and what used to be the ASA. He's more or less disbanded the ASA for a bunch of administrative reasons. But he has a bunch of people who are very thoroughly trained that, are in his sphere, including Riley Bodycomb. I think he's in Louisiana now. That's an individual recommendation. He's a really good guy. But, so, right, USA Sambo, Steve Kopfer, and the former ASA. And then there's a fellow named Joe Neely who runs the 2 Arnold Classic tournaments per year. And he has a thing that's called Sambo Joe, which it sounds like it's a little bit more important than, hey, how you doing, rather than, formal. That's the way Joe Neely is. He has some people working with him. Those are the 3 main ways of finding out about where and who teaches Sambo in this country. There are a lot of people who kind of learn some of it and some interesting claims. Black belts in Sambo, it's very nice. I belonged to an organization at one time that actually awarded belts in Sambo. But, that's not really the way we do it. There are a few times where people can say, or a few ways in which people can say they have a black belt in Sambo. But, you got to look that up pretty carefully. The old American Sambo Academy, which is no longer in existence, gave out a few black belts in Sambo. And then if you had placed in a world tournament back when FILA, which is the international governing body for wrestling, was in charge of Sambo, and I'm talking back to the 1980s, there was a kind of belt that was handed out that went along with achievement in competition. And people kind of used that well or badly. There was no Dan and Q grade. So it went from first level, which was lowest, all the way up to 12th level, which is highest. So we had people saying they were 11th and 12th level black belts in Sambo, and then you had to kind of explain that that's not really what it was. Right. But that does mean a good level of achievement, So, yeah, you look for people who are actually practicing it. And right now, you have to say, if it's a black belt in Sambo, it's either an obsolete term or you might check into the instructor's credentials. I'm not saying that that's fake. There are a few that were given well. But, yeah, basically look for ASA or the former ASA, USA Sambo, Joe Neely Sambo Joe, right? And, beware of those people who make really extravagant and weird claims. Just like any other martial art activity, there's always somebody out there who will, frankly, pose, But you can tell. After a while, you can tell.
Sure. Now, let me ask you this, and just kind of switching gears a little bit away from the sporting aspects of Sambo, but looking more at the combat Sambo and the military Sambo. We live in an era where the reality-based martial arts, I guess, for lack of a better term, are really all the fad. And, if you're not doing mixed martial arts, you're probably doing some form of reality-based martial arts. That's kind of the new thing in the last, decade or so. And I've always been curious because, Sambo being a military art, something used by police forces, it's now, it's available out there. I don't see it as prevalent as some other systems like the Israeli Krav Maga that really took off here, and around the world. But I would imagine that the art lends itself very well to those needs and those those training goals that people may have for realistic, modern urban self-defense. What resources that you're aware of are out there for that type of training if the individual's looking for that side of the coin instead of the sporting side? And what are your thoughts about that art as an art for self-defense? You've trained in various martial arts to a high level. What are your personal opinions of Sambo as a self-defense art?
Well, Sambo is very pragmatic as to what it uses for self-defense and for unarmed combat. I find that unarmed combat looks like unarmed combat anywhere you go. That especially if you've taken a look at W.E. Fairbairn and Rex Applegate and all the rest of that there are combat elements from there that you'll find in Japanese martial arts, in Central European, German martial arts. There's a book, by the way, out that is, I think Paladin Press publishes it, that is actually a German response directly to the book Get Tough. It's kind of, I think, the counter methods to the British gangster techniques, something like that. I actually have a copy upstairs. Essentially it's based on jiu-jitsu, but, the chin jab or shomenate or whatever you want to call it, all those techniques are common to everything. And, simple is best, very, very there. Right, Sambo is no exception. But, what really amazed me when I first began to see stuff coming out of the then Soviet Union was the emphasis on restraint techniques. Most martial arts would teach you how to get away, Sambo taught you how to capture. It was martial art that was created for, by and for people in the NKVD and the GRQ. Right? And so they wanted to be able to capture people. There was a little bit more of that than there was of escape, although it was there. Right? And so there's a thing like the Encyclopedia of Combat Sambo, really shows you the punches and kicks and stick and knife techniques, anti-stick, anti-knife techniques. They're all there, and they're not done in a very formalized way. There are no kata. There are drills and practices. So, Krav Maga is holding like it's of a piece. But it's there, and it was done, and it was studied very scientifically. And I'd say, yeah, right now in the U.S., true combat Sambo, well, actually, there are three things, and you phrased it quite well. There's Sambo, which most people is Sambo wrestling. There's combat Sambo, which is an MMA competition. And then there's military Sambo, which is Sambo as self-defense unarmed combat. Those are three different things. There's a fellow named Galperin in Boston who has never claimed to teach anything but self-defense Sambo. I haven't heard from him in a while, but I understand he's still out there. I teach self-defense Sambo. It looks like it would imagine you. I'm sorry, I don't mean to trivialize it, but it looks like what you might imagine. The techniques are grappling oriented because boxing with somebody who's armed is idiotic. And it's essentially to stun the opponent, neutralize his use of the weapon, stun the opponent, take him down, and finish him. That's really the pattern for jiu-jitsu, for Sambo. Non-competitive jiu-jitsu, self-defense jiu-jitsu, for Sambo, for Krav Maga. How creative you get, how intuitive you get, as opposed to how formalized you have the technique, is up to the disciplines. With Sambo, no, they're not going to tell you move A against move B. It's like, okay, this is what you can do. Now let's see how you put it together. It's very effective. It stands in contrast a bit to Systema because we don't do the fluid slow motion, half speed things. Systema, as you might say it, is a very interesting study, but Sambo is more a contrast to that than it is something that does that. There are people who say that they're both together, and there are people who practice both. But a lot of Sambists would rather do military Sambo as their self-defense basis. Not to knock the other thing. It's good, but really, it's a different study. I'm sorry, did I make that clear? Did I brush over something there? I feel I might have.
No, that was excellent. Sir, so actually that leads me to my next question, because you mentioned Systema and there are other arts related to it that are coming from, the former Soviet Union. Are those, I have heard people make the claim that that is a form of Sambo, and other people say, no, it's a totally separate thing. What is the relationship there to your understanding between those two types of training?
Well, Sambo was formulated by several people, the famous names of Ochepkov, Kharlampiev, Spiridonov, in 1938. It became a national activity sport of the Soviet Union, right? It was essentially an answer to jiu-jitsu and judo. The Russo-Japanese War stung the Russian people. They wanted to have an effective answer. We did too. We came up with things like Defendu and that kind of stuff, right? A nice name to go with whatever martial practice it was, right? We didn't stick with names. Fairbairn taught unarmed combat as far as he was concerned, and he didn't have a name for it, I think Defendu came in there somewhere, right? With the Russians, Soviet Union at the time, they came up with Sambo, and it was, a very scientific and very systematized study of combative practices, martial arts, what have you, right? From there, a few people, notably a man named Kudochnikov, began showing demonstrations of martial art that essentially seemed similar to some of the highly publicized demonstrations that Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, did, where it was showing, whether there's a little showmanship to it or not, how good this stuff was, how you could defeat several people at the same time, how you could do it unarmed, how you could do it with any improvised weapon, and how you could do it fluidly and be very, very effective. Kudochnikov is really more or less responsible single-handedly for Systema, which is a name that arose from, what do you call it? Well, it's our system. System of what? Well, it's our system of fighting. Well, and then finally, Systema, the system. Really, that's what that means. Came out of that. So it arose as a, shall we say, movement that grew from Sambo itself. Not all Sambists subscribe to it. But, there's a good number of people in the military, Vasiliev, but Ryabko, these are military men. They're unarmed combat instructors, and they feel that this is the best way to go. Some people within, in fact, many within that milieu, Russia, etc., don't do that. They kind of stick with self-defense as they know it. So Systema, good choice, nice stuff. I myself have stuck with military Sambo. It makes more sense to me intuitively, and I think it's a choice. I mean, you're aware of the differences between Systema and Sambo in method?
I am not schooled in either form, so I'm not. So if you could enlighten us, that'd be wonderful.
Okay, Sambo is a selection of techniques. I mean, grappling, the approach to, somebody comes at you with a barehanded or with a weapon, you learn to deal with it. And, essentially it starts with grappling. Like I say, most military unarmed combat methods do close with the person, neutralize their chance to use a weapon, take them down, stun them, and finish them out when they've lost their balance. Rex Applegate, classic quote: take your unbalance your opponent and never let him regain his balance. This is a really good way of approaching unarmed combat, in my opinion. But it's done, more or less as phenomenologically, shall we say, as the technique, as the offensive motion arises. And it does not have the attitude towards training, which, if you look at Systema, it's done a slower speed than full speed at first, and with an extreme fluidity. And the claim is that it'll make you more adaptable to anything the opponent does. So that practice method, that signal, essentially fluid and at first kind of slow kind of thing, is a trademark of Systema. They feel that they're using bodily energies in ways that Sambo people do not ascribe to. They don't call it ki, but there is, a physical, even spiritual reference to Systema. Again, it's a choice you make. Like, are you going to do jujitsu, so to speak, unarmed combat, or are you going to ascribe to Aikido? And Aikido, again, the fluidity, the adaptability. Some might say they're cooperating a little bit too much. Some might say, no, you're going to train effectively with these more dangerous locking motions only if you do cooperate. It's a choice, right? And I'd say that's really the contrast, the jujitsu as opposed to Aikido, karate as opposed to Aikido, Systema as opposed to Sambo. You might call one hard and one soft.
Now, has the rise in popularity of Systema and the related arts, has that been beneficial to Sambo? Have people started there and, gotten their interest peaked and then moved their way into Sambo and started exploring, the art that you train? It's
funny. If you do Systema, you tend to stick with Systema. Right. If you do Sambo, there are people who transfer back and forth doing Systema and Sambo. But Sambos tend to be pretty grounded in Sambo as far as I've seen, especially the Russians. Americans are more likely to experiment between the two, as far as I've seen. My view is not universal, let me tell you. But Systema is for people seeking, I think, a different end view than Sambo. Can they mix? Oh, I'm sure they can. Right. But, no, I see it as essentially two separate movements. Sometimes they combine. I myself, I have to say, my personal preference is to do Sambo.
Sir, now let's switch gears back here, and I want to ask you before we wrap up, because it's a question that a few people posed to me. We scheduled this interview within 24 hours, and I mentioned to a few people I was going to speak to you, and they all kind of asked me the same thing. Sambo in the Olympics, is it going to happen? What are the chances of it happening? Is there a push for it?
There's a big push for it. It's coming from FIAS. It is backed with the full faith and force of the Russian government, which is generally a big deal, a national movement like Taekwondo with Korea, Judo with Japan. Sambo, Putin himself is a master of sport in Sambo and a seventh dan in Judo. So there's a very good chance it can get into the Olympics. Will it? I don't know. Why? I don't, they're approving Olympic sports, but there seems to be a hesitation to approve new combat sports for the Olympics. But is there a good chance? Hey, look, I spoke to a Theos representative, and it's kind of saying maybe within the year. So something. If you have a nation, an actual government of a nation backing you, enough participants, and there certainly are, and frankly enough money backing the sport, most likely you're getting into the Olympics. It's only a matter of time. Right now, I think with Tokyo coming up, the big emphasis will be on karate. I think they're ready. They'll probably be there along with Sambo or maybe a bit ahead.
Well, sir, I want to thank you for joining us today. That's about all the time we have for today. But again, I know you made time for us in your schedule. You're getting ready to travel to officiate the games in South America. So I want to wish you luck on your trip and just again extend my thanks for being on the show with us to talk about Sambo. Next time, I would definitely like to invite you to come on and we can talk fencing.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. I look forward to it, and I've always admired what you've done with armed combat. It is fantastic, and it's just great, and I'm honored to speak with you. One more thing, coaches talk for a living. If I've been a little bit obtuse, I hope that you'll give me a chance to correct that the next time.
No, it was wonderful. Thank you again. It really was great.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right.